Welcome to Sonic Sorcery Podcast, episode number 3. Today I'm joined by a new friend of mine. His name's Simon Passmore, and he's a classical musician and educator and composer and MIDI wizard of some kind that lives in the UK and has graciously accepted the invitation to chat with me today. Hi Simon, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Thanks for taking the time. I can't remember if I told you this before, but I found you via somebody in my music production Discord community mentioned V-horns by acoustic samples, right?
That's it.
Yeah. And so anyway, on there I was having my mind blown by all the demos they have, and then appeared one of yours, and I thought, what? That's what I thought. I thought this is like some sort of next level thing happening here. I don't know who this is. And I went to your thing and I was like, he only has 1,000 subs. Who is this guy? What is he doing? So I just started listening to a whole bunch of your stuff, and I thought I need to talk to whoever this is. So amazing work, honestly, on the mock-up stuff. Like, wow.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, they're amazing instruments, those V-horns. And yeah, pretty much everything I've used from acoustic samples is just like really top-rate stuff.
And so for anybody watching this that isn't in the like composing music production world and doesn't know at all what we're talking about virtual instruments where people, generally in the past, people take samples, meaning recordings of some instrument, say a saxophone. They take many, many recordings of every single thing that a saxophone can do. All the notes with all their different velocities, meaning air pressure, all the clicking sounds, the breathing sounds, the everything. And they combine it all through programming into one thing that plays it back realistically, to some extent anyway. And so this particular company doing this V-horn series, which is not just what I talked about, we'll talk about this afterwards, in terms of it also includes physical sampling or physical modeling, if I understand correctly, right?
Yeah.
And they just are like bananas. They sound so good. I immediately bought them all. I couldn't believe it. So we're going to get into listening to some of your amazing work here in a second. But before that, we have a very important question to tackle, and I think you might know what I'm going to ask you. So just tell me very simply, what is music? That's all I want to know. What is music?
Yeah, I thought this question might be coming. I've seen your previous two, and I think I agree with both of your previous guests. It's such a tricky one to define, and I guess it's probably different for every single musician, but I think it's a really important question to keep asking yourself throughout your life, really, if you do music, because otherwise, yeah, it's a good way of saying, why do I do it, basically? And for me, I think music is mostly communication, like whether that's between performer and audience, or composer and audience through the performer, or composer and performer, or composer and God, or something. That always seems to be communication. Like, I haven't met anyone yet that just wrote something for themselves to, never be heard. And I'm not an expert in art, but I think that's sort of what art is, basically, isn't it? Communication between artist and whoever looks or listens to the art.
That's a wonderful way to look at it, and I agree completely. What can you say about that? I mean, the question is, what's being communicated?
Yeah, that's the question I think we spend our lives trying to find the answer to, particularly as performers, when we're kind of third in the rankings of composer and audience. If you're a performer, you're just a kind of a vessel or vehicle to kind of transmit the composer's music. And I think the more you listen to their music, the more you understand it, and the more you know what they're trying to say through the music, if that makes sense. Like, I think J.S. Bach kind of tops the default who's the best composer of all time list. But I remember as a teenager, I couldn't get into it and thought, this is all just boring Baroque stuff. And then just took the time one day and listened, and suddenly, like, music just made sense almost overnight, really. I can remember the exact piece I was listening to when it clicked. And then, everything kind of just comes together, and you do some more research and you find that every single composer throughout history has come to the same conclusion. Apart from Tchaikovsky, weirdly, he said something like, he's not a genius, but I guess the fugues are quite fun, or something along those lines. But he had some horrible words to say about Brahms as well. But yeah, more or less, every composer's come to the same conclusion. So, what was the original question again?
It doesn't matter anymore. That's also my experience too. I listened to a lot of all various periods when I was growing up because my grandmother listened to it and she would buy me various classical CDs, and I would hear Bach back at that time and think, yeah, I don't know, constant stream of notes. Yeah, fine. And then there came a time, I don't know what, as a late teenager, I started to become more interested. And you know what? Who actually got me onto it? There's a incredibly influential guitar player in my life who's very unknown. His name's Ted Green. And he was just absolutely obsessed by Bach, and to the point where he learned on guitar to play this improvised 3-part counterpoint in a very Baroque style, just up and down the neck, just endlessly doing this. And I thought,
amazing.
What is that sound?
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, that's the Bach sound. So I started to get back into it, and I thought, what have I been doing with my life? Like, this is where I need to be living now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Bach on guitar is so good. My dad was a classical guitarist as well and just played all these kind of Bach inventions and things. It works really well.
It works really well, yeah. There's something about the timbre of it is so nice. And I grew up playing guitar primarily, and I came from such a rock and then into jazz background that this idea of like using the guitar in this contrapuntal way wasn't really part of my life. I played some classical pieces here and there, but I never really thought of the guitar in that way, And then when I started doing that, I thought, this is actually, like, for me, one of the more enjoyable ways to play, because the limitations of the instrument, I don't know, make it some kind of puzzle about how these lines move and how you keep your fingers in place and, blah, blah, blah. Do you play guitar at all?
No, I don't. No, a couple of chords, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's fascinating to hear.
But you play primarily piano, correct?
That's right. Yeah. That's my kind of main instrument. I do little bits of organ as well. Worked as an organist for about 10 years, and did cello in school, but haven't really picked it up since then.
Well, before we get into some of your background and whatever, and before we listen to this piece, which I do want to do, let's go back to this question. You said communication. And what I'd like to know, perhaps, is like how to phrase that, how to talk about any of this stuff. What was communicated to you? You know what I mean? Like, what about the music you were hearing growing up? There was some sort of something that you were receiving that made you feel, I assume, want to do this. Now I want to communicate. You don't want to just listen to it; you're wanting to do it. So, what is that? What came to you through the music?
It's quite hard to put it into words, actually, isn't it? I don't know. It's hard to say. It's like a language, and you think it's one thing, and then suddenly you hear something else, and a whole book of words opens. And I don't know if that's the best way to put it. No, it's really hard to put that into words. I'm afraid. Just
I know.
Yeah.
I know how it goes. You don't need to. I like to push that question in similar ones because it's fun to experiment with. So let's listen to a piece here. This is. I don't know if you want me to play this one or not, but this is the one I'm going to play because this is the one that I heard first and, just kind of blew my mind a bit. This is the Monsters, Inc. opening titles. So for anyone that doesn't know, Monsters, Inc. is a Pixar film from 20 years ago, 15 years ago? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's classic, yeah.
It's a classic anyway. And anyway, it's quite a jazzy thing here. And yeah, what I'd like to reiterate before we get into this is, maybe not reiterate, what I'd like to make clear is that for anyone who's unsure about this, everything that you're going to hear is done digitally. There are no musicians at Simon's Place with microphones being recorded. Everything is played in on a MIDI keyboard and then programmed in various ways that don't matter for this conversation. And then this is the result. And I'm particularly interested in paying attention to the soloists that are playing here and just how lifelike the thing sounds. And had I not said all this, would you know? Would you bat an eye at what you're hearing to think that this was someone programming it in a computer, So let's take a listen, and then we can chat about it after. Damn.
It's a good piece of music, isn't it?
It's a good piece of music. It's a good piece of music, and it's a great rendition of it too. It's just mind-boggling. And so, just to be clear for everybody, you know, literally every single bit of that has to be put in by hand in some way. Every drum hit, cymbal, walking bass, guitar pluck, piano, everything that you hear, nothing happens automatically. You know, it's just. You sit with a blank canvas and you just do what? You know, that's the question. So that's the question. How do you do this? How do you even start tackling this, you know?
So I think I started with the bass line for this. And I don't really own... I do now, but at the time I didn't really own bass guitars or just guitars generally. So I think those are just the free ones, which do a great job. I think from Orchestral Tools do a free bass guitar and free guitar. Just started with the bass line, kind of had an idea of the chords, and then probably put the tune in above that.
When you say you start with the bass line, is this all transcribed by ear, or are you working off a score?
All transcribed, yeah. If the score exists, I couldn't find it.
Yeah. And so your transcription of it, like if you're going to start with the bass line, how are you actually going about transcribing this? I mean, there's many people out there I know who are working on their ear training and want to be able to pick up stuff by ear and figure out what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And this is, you know, a pretty great way to work on that, but it's pretty advanced. So, you know, what is your actual process for doing that? And do you have perfect pitch?
Sometimes, for some reason it comes and goes. I played an organ that was out of tune for a long time, and that really kind of shook my ear for a bit, to the point where every note I'd pitch would be kind of half a semitone flat. But transcribing wise, I don't think you necessarily need it as long as you have a keyboard in front of you. I think the most important thing is to just remember that you can't do it all in one go. I presume people can't do all that in one go. And it's okay to just jot down little bits at a time, especially when you can just repeat it. So I think what I did was just probably spacebar, listen for 5-10 seconds, spacebar, and then jot down the bass notes, go back 2 seconds and carry on, and just do it in chunks. It's much easier.
And when you're jotting down, are you like on in standard notation or in MIDI?
Probably for mock-up, just straight onto the computer, I think is easier.
Yeah.
But notation is fine as well. And then at least you've got a hard copy of it in front of you.
Yeah.
And I also do the programming in chunks as well. So I'll write a bar or 2 or 3 of bass line, and then I'll just duplicate the track and continue underneath, so I don't have to worry about joining it all up. So the bass line for that whole mock-up should just look like a zigzag rather than a straight line.
I see.
Particularly if you're using the mod wheel and you want to kind of prepare the mod wheel before you start playing, you might accidentally write over the previous section. So just duplicate the track and then just keep swapping between them. Gives you kind of space to get ready for the entries.
Okay, so I want to just reiterate that because that's a pretty interesting notion for anyone who's doing this. Just to clarify, you're saying instead of transcribing all into one track, you're doing some chunk, let's say 2 bars, duplicating the track, an empty version of the same track. Yep. And then you're doing the next 2 bars there so that when you're recording your mod wheel stuff, it's not overwriting the previous thing. And then eventually, you're just leaving them in 2 separate tracks, or are you eventually merging them? Not that it really matters.
I guess if I were ever to export MIDI, like not for Monsters Inc., but for something else I'd done, I would have to sit down and join them all together. But it's a pain kind of just getting rid of tiny dots on the modulation. So normally just leave it as 2 tracks.
Sure. Okay, so you start with bass, and then you said maybe melody goes over top?
Probably, yeah. Just keen to get onto the saxophone part, I think, and saxophone and trombone, vibraphone and piano after that, probably, and drums I'll leave till last because it's the one I find the trickiest and probably the one that took me the longest. I'm not a drummer at all, and I don't know how to program drums. So normally I just relied on loops, but I wanted to have a go at doing this properly. So.
Wow. And when you're doing a, say, section by section, say you're doing the saxophone part, are you a perfectionist at that point, or are you just getting it down and you're going to come back later and tweak?
I think, is perfectionist the right word? There are definitely bits I can hear now that I do differently, but it's really just to see. I was curious about how far V horns could go in terms of all these kind of pitch bends and shakes and split notes and things. I was just thinking that they're so responsive. In theory, they should be able to do almost anything. And my wife, Sarah, just said, like, why don't you do the Monsters Inc.? You know, how long can it take? It's only 2 minutes. Yes, I just thought, yeah, why not? Give it a go. And it just ended up sounding all right from the beginning. And thought, yeah, this is doable.
Wow. So by the time you finish transcribing the sax part, let's say, you're done with it. You feel like this is the part and I've basically got it right.
Yes and no. The solo I probably would have come back to and just thought I can make that sound a bit better. And like I said, even now I can hear things. I know the instrument's a bit better now. All of those tracks on the saxophone are just kind of auto vibrato, but now I use this volume slider on my keyboard to control the vibrato. And I've got much better, control over that now.
That's so funny. I never would have thought that you didn't have it set to manual mode already when you were doing it. I mean, it shows you how good the instrument is that it just set to auto mode. It can already do like this.
Yes, but I think I've got about 8 tracks for that saxophone solo alone, and each of the 8 tracks has different speeds of vibrato. So I'll play one bar on one, and then maybe even one note on another one. Just so it sounds varied, but actually it's just 8 different versions of automatic vibrato.
That's so funny. Wow. Okay, so, and do you have, I mean, I know this is, you call yourself a classical musician. Obviously, this is within the early jazz realm. And so, like, is that something you're particularly familiar with, or is it a genre that's of interest to you? Or
I wouldn't call myself an expert or even a professional, but I've definitely heard it all my life, and I'm used to particularly the early stuff, like kind of 30s, 40s swing stuff. I'm very used to that. So I kind of had a feel for the music anyway, but I definitely wouldn't go to me for lessons on it, I'd say.
Are you then, obviously you're transcribing all the chords, and are you aware of the harmony? And, you know, does this factor into kind of the process of transcribing? Knowing what the harmony is of course narrowing down what you're even probably looking for in the first place. Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm familiar with those chords in that, and they're great. And so, they are great.
That's another good thing for mock-ups is it's always important to do a piece of music you like or you enjoy. Otherwise, it becomes really tedious really quickly.
I can imagine.
So, yeah.
And are there any sort of like non-musical parts of this process? Like, do you find the thing mentally enjoyable, draining? Focus is a problem. I mean, anything?
Yes, it's funny you say non-musical because this is still like relatively new to me. I started doing this in lockdown. I mean, obviously I did music before that, but but just programming and the MIDI stuff is relatively new to me. And I always saw production and mixing and mastering as this kind of like non-musical element, the kind of engineering technical side of it. But the more I get into it, the more it feels like it's all part of the same thing. Like I'm really, really interested in the mastering side of things and the mixing side of things and how it enhances the music. I'd say the music itself is still the most important thing, but I've definitely well and truly fallen down the rabbit hole of mixing and mastering and yeah, that side of things. But in terms of the process, when it comes to non-musical things, I do find it quite boring, kind of assigning CC numbers, and it still goes over my head. I really try and understand it, but I'm not a techie person at all. And so I just struggle to keep up with discussions on this stuff.
Understandable. I mean, it really shows how far having a instrumental musical background goes when it comes to working with music in the computer. You know, so I've of course interact with many people who are just beginning and many people who are not traditional musicians. They're coming to, and not just coming to like making beats, but like coming to actually programming orchestral scores and doing all this without any real musical background prior to that. And there's so many mountains to climb there. You know, there's not just the technicalities of it, let alone, you know, how to use a DAW, let alone how to mix and master. There's also what is a C major chord and how does this interact with this? And, you know, some people just have these incredible ears just naturally. And for them, the process is much simpler. But for those of us that aren't that way initially, that's a pretty uphill slog. And, you know, taking a slog, it's enjoyable if you enjoy it, of course, but taking you as an example as someone who didn't do this until a few years ago, and all of a sudden, bang, it sounds like basically as good as it can sound, you know, it really shows you how much that can help you.
Big time, yeah. No, I've been really, well, I say fortunate, I've been really, I'm fortunate that I did music as a degree and postgrad and just throughout my life. I mean, it's not, you know, the best paid career in the world. You definitely choose it for the arts rather than the income. I'll always remember my first piano lesson at Conservatoire, where I'd been sent a list of pieces to learn over the holidays. And one of them was this Liszt etude that I loved, and I probably couldn't get anywhere near it now. But I took it in for the first week and played it as best as I possibly could. I'd listened to recordings over the summer, and it was more or less a performance in the first lesson. And my teacher said, "Oh, that's great. Well done. You've done great work. I've heard it like that before, though. Have you got anything of your own to say about it?" And it just really shook me and just completely changed my outlook on music. And since then, I've always kind of, you know, rather than trying to copy how my heroes of the time played it, I mean, they do their versions. And I think the point I'm trying to make is everyone will do the same piece of music differently. So everyone can learn music. It does help to have, you know, I've done it for decades, but it's never too late, and everyone has something of their own to bring.
Agreed. And in fact, the limitations imposed on someone by not having skill XYZ, whether it's, you know, musical instrument or something else, becomes part of what you do, right? Because you can't do this, you end up doing that, and you get good at doing that. And it probably ends up being enjoyable, actually, to be able to do that instead of this. And that's one of the cool things about this, you know, like you say, is one thing to look at your heroes and say, oh, I must need to know everything they know and be like them and whatever. But when you start just getting your hands dirty and doing it, you're like, actually, I can kind of just do this over here, and this is equally cool to me, you know?
100%, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
So, okay, what is, you know, at least in brief, sort of your upbringing, both just area of the world, experience with life and whatever as a kid, and also musically, what was going on for you?
So I'm from the northeast of England, up near the border with Scotland, in a small town in Northumberland called Hexham. And my musical upbringing was just kind of singing in the local church choir, which is such a good way of training your ear and just general musicianship, to be honest. You kind of have to listen all the time and perform as well all the time. And it's just some of the greatest music as well written in the last 1,000 years or whatever. And then I was lucky enough to get piano lessons with the directors of music there, who were both amazing, huge influence on my development. And then from then on, it was just kind of music school at the weekend, kind of go for lessons, play some chamber music, and then on to music college, and then just into the world, really, try and pay the bills.
And why was it classically focused?
Just my development in general, you mean? Or?
Mm-hmm.
Good question. I think we have a kind of system of exams for music learning here in the UK, and most of that is kind of, that's like 80-90% classical pieces. You kind of learn these pieces and you've done your grade 1, and then you learn another 3, and you've done your grade 2, all the way up to grade 8. And the entire kind of syllabus is focused on classical stuff. But there are many different paths, obviously. And maybe in a different life I would have gone down the jazz route or the music tech route. I'm kicking myself now for not taking music tech as an A-level or a module at uni. Would have come in handy now.
Sometimes I wonder, there's, like you say, many paths, and it's not just the classical path that someone ends up going down sort of by chance. I mean, by chance, it's all perhaps by chance, who knows? But, that, I guess what I'm getting at is, did you want that? Was classical music something for you as a kid where you listened to and you're like, yeah, this is it? Or was it more, oh, this is what I'm playing because this is what I'm playing?
Yes, good question. This is what I'm playing up until about 12 or 13, when I really started to take it seriously. I discovered like Chopin and Ravel and all these new colours and amazing pieces that I hadn't heard before then, really. And then I just took it seriously, practiced every day, wanted to learn all the big pieces and be a concert pianist.
That's great. And were your parents an influence on you in these ways? Did they listen to classical, or was they just supportive of it?
They were amazingly supportive, and to the extent where if I just missed the odd academic lesson in school but was practicing piano, it wasn't the end of the world, I think. But they knew I wanted to do it full time, so yeah, they were really, really supportive. Drove me out miles away to get lessons with some really great teachers, and yeah, didn't mind me practicing it in the middle of the night with headphones on. So yeah, they've been supportive all the way. And
do they choose to listen to classical? Were you hearing it in your house, or only hearing it when you would play?
Yeah, they listened, definitely. My dad's more of a keen musician than my mum. My mum's a great musician as well, but doesn't so much listen to classical in her spare time. Whereas my dad had a huge record collection. So yeah, it was on a lot of the time.
It's hard to avoid the impact of early exposure to music, especially music with sort of any degree of complexity. Not that that's a requirement, but there's no doubt that like a young mind hearing this detailed and intricate music, it does something to you, the figuring out of the patterns and the understanding of the form and the way it moves and all this, that so much of it is subconscious, for lack of a better term. You can't make yourself get it. You just by osmosis, right?
It's fascinating, isn't it? That I bet there's loads of dissertations on this and the kind of psychology of music, and why does a major chord sound happy to our ears, and why does a minor chord sound sad, and why do we hear dissonance and consonance and stuff, and why does music make us feel a certain way? Yeah, it's amazing stuff. We've got a 2-year-old, and we see everywhere online kind of like, play Mozart for your babies and play Mozart for your kids, and yeah, I wonder what the theory behind that is. Apparently, there is a link between kind of better performance in school and listening to Mozart, and kind of happier kids and Mozart. So, yeah, I don't know.
Who knows? And it really feels like the brain starts to treat it as a language of a sort when it's really heard early enough, and you can tell. For people that were heavily involved in music from a very early age, which does happen, they just have a degree of fluency in that world that for better or worse, you essentially can't replicate no matter what you do later in life. That's not a shot at the rest of us saying we can never be there. Oh, it's so bad. We just are what we are. And those people get that opportunity. But there's no doubt, like, seen it over and over again. These kids that I've taught or have seen online or whatever, that have just grown up either in church or in choirs or wherever it happened to be. And it just oozes out of them, really.
Choirs are amazing training. I think even when you're older, it still can really just open up a new world for you, basically. But yeah, no, I agree. Music, it is just like a language, and it often takes a lot of hard work to understand and speak it. But Monsters Inc., the piece then is a classic example of that. Just listening to these little kind of statements, melodic statements, like little, chunks of theme and melody. It just feels like conversation, and you can kind of feel the punctuation at the end of each statement, if that makes sense. You can feel when it's a comma or question mark or exclamation mark, or if you call it those things in North America.
We do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Like, it is absolutely its own language, and in fact, music seems to have several languages that all interrelate: the harmonic language, melodic language, the rhythmic language, and then these languages have all their dialects spread across the world. That once you get a general feel for one, kind of as you were alluding to earlier, there's the sense that, oh, okay, this is like what music sounds like. And then you hear something completely different, and you're like, oh my God, I had no idea that this was even possible. And it sort of seems like the history of genre evolution, style evolution, is this almost demonstrating of a possibility. Someone comes to some sort of inspiration about a new way to explore or do something. Other people hear it and they say, wow, I had no idea you could even do it like that. And then suddenly, bang, it like opens up a world, right?
That's absolutely it. That's the history of classical music. All the big names did exactly that. Just pushed boundaries and pushed boundaries. I saw for the first time this weekend a color chart there was a Russian composer called Scriabin. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's just kind of contemporary of Rachmaninoff, I think. But he had this thing called synesthesia. I'm not 100% sure if that's the right term. Synesthesia, where you see colors when you hear music. Anyway, I saw for the first time a chart of the colors he assigned to different notes, and when I think of the pieces in those keys, it all makes like perfect sense. And yeah, it's really fascinating seeing it. Anyway, why did I bring him up? Oh yeah, he was one of the biggest kind of boundary pushers, I think, for me anyway, and particularly in the piano world. Like, if you listen to stuff at the start of his journey compared to the very end, it's like two different people.
Oh, really?
And yeah, it's just his own language by the end. And I think he was keen on like spirituality and mysticism and stuff, and trying to push away from where music was going. And yeah, it's definitely worth hearing.
Okay, well, that's great. I'm very unfamiliar with his work, so I would love to check it out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the same thing happens today in a sense, and I don't know how familiar you are with this, and this is one of the areas of questions I wanted to get into, is sort of, I saw on your website at least you had some electronic pieces, variety of little explorations.
You're not going to play those
now,
are you?
No. You want me to?
No thanks.
And I didn't know how familiar you are with the world of electronic music. It's very big in my life and has been for a long time. And in this world, because of the medium of the internet and the ability to essentially self-publish music, the spread and diversification of genres is just, at a rate that could never be done in the past, of course. It seems like every other month, a new subgenre has been born out of one little thing someone did differently. They've made it that day, released it the next day, and everyone goes, bang, this is it now, and then bang, 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 bang. And it just spreads. And it's a really interesting comparison point between how this music evolves versus how classical music has evolved. And one of my teachers would say that, at the end, let's say, of what we traditionally consider the classical period, we have this body of work, but also this body of theoretical framework that is centuries in development. Like the harmonic language that was being discovered, used, eventually abused, and then left behind, in the evolution, was like, hundreds of people in successive generations doing this and finding out and saying, oh, this does this and this does, and then people codifying it and so on. And that legacy is something that is so deep and is so well trodden as to be able to say, this is what it is. This is the sound of this is this, and so on. Where this modern thing that's happening, nothing is ever around long enough to do that. You know what I mean? Like the next iteration has appeared already before you're even done exploring this one. And it's not that that's bad. It's just, I don't know what it is.
It's endless, isn't it? No, that's such a good way of putting it. And it's funny to see like our reactions to new music today, how similar they were to music in the past. I mean, the really famous one in classical music is The Rite of Spring, and that they were like riots at the premiere and all this. But now it's a masterpiece. And I think same with Bach even. I'm not sure he was appreciated much in his day, or enough, or truly recognised for what he was in his day. And it's funny to see yourself become that grumbling audience member, this is way too modern for me. This isn't music, this is just sounds. And, give it 50 years and I bet people will look back and go, yeah, this is genius.
I know. It's fascinating. And the funny thing is there's no way to sit down and just do that, to just sit down and plan to make the next innovation in music. It happens by miracle, by whatever, by stumble and fall. You would love to be able to say, I'm going to usher in some new style. Here I come. I'm the next whatever, right? But what do you even do? You can't even sit down and conceive of it. It's either there or it isn't.
Yeah, 100%. I'm not sure where we're up to now in terms of music progression. I'm still catching up with the last few decades.
It's interesting to see the influx of jazz into the electronic world, and I see less of, or perhaps I don't see less of, I don't know, maybe it's more covert, the influence of classical musicians into the electronic world, and perhaps that's because of just the style of mindset, let's say, and of lifestyle of a classical musician is generally one who is performing, if not teaching, doing something physical with the instrument, usually if they're serious all the time. And they're not so much at the computer. And so there's a bit of a less of a cross-pollination between the whole view of how classical music was composed as opposed to the very loop-based view of the modern styles. But I don't see, honestly, so much of a fusion where I do see a huge amount of jazz being influenced into modern electronic music now. Is this something that you explore or know anybody in your life that has explored this kind of fusion of classical and electronic?
Yes, and it's mostly people that were doing this when we were all at school. Like, they were classical musicians, but they were already really keen on electronic music and what I thought was kind of pop music at the time. And now they're the ones with a much broader view on music, and I'm still kind of playing catch up now. But yes, definitely, I know lots of people who are like just as fluent in electronic stuff as they are in classical, and similarly for jazz and stuff. And it's an amazing thing to have. Like, no genre should ever be, overlooked or discarded. Or I didn't know anything about synths and always thought I was just, hold a key down on the keyboard and it does it all for you, right? And then the more I learned about them over the last few years, I feel like I've become a much better musician, in 6 months of learning something completely new, instead of 6 years of just working on something I knew well already. It's amazing how much it broadens your horizons as a musician to take new genres on board.
It's a really interesting point, yeah. And I worked as a synth programmer for a few years, and in that time period, I got so familiar with timbre in general and how things are generated, and that fully changed my perception of even acoustic instruments, what's even happening there. When you have to, similar to the mock-up, you sit down at this blank canvas, it's just a sine wave literally doing nothing. And then you say, how do you get some sort of, depending on the genre you're working in, whatever, lead sound, bass sound, chord sound out of this by just manipulating waveforms? It teaches you so much about how harmonics and music and our ear and hearing all work. And funny enough, it ties into how harmony works as well, because of course all the harmonics and the harmonic series and whatever. It was a hugely eye-opening thing for me that at first I thought would have just been some sort of dry technical thing I was learning,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
No, 100%. Yeah, I agree. I've still got loads to learn in that area. But one thing I did hear, I think it was maybe one of the people at Acoustic Samples that told me this. If you take away the beginning of a note for an instrument, it's almost impossible to tell what the instrument is. You've heard this as well, yeah. And it's true. Like you cut off the start of the note, and it's almost impossible to tell a bassoon from a cello listening through headphones.
I know. It's so bizarre.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's eye-opener for me. But yes, I've forgotten that you were a synth programmer. I must email you at some point.
So much of the process is the attack of the sound. It's and in the world of making your own sounds, of course, you can do anything. You can go record a hit on some metallic thing with a bass drum, with a whatever, and that's the attack of every note that you make. And that level of granularity is obviously not possible in the traditional world, not without building your own instruments. And the level of granularity within the whole world of DAWs in general is something that is basically unprecedented in the musical world. And, prior to that, instruments sound like what they sound like, and the space that you're in sounds like what it sounds like. And you don't have to worry about those things unless you're someone that designs concert halls or builds instruments. But as the player, you just show up and you do the thing, and it sounds like that, And in this world, it sounds like nothing until you make it do whatever you want, or you click presets or whatever, right? Which someone else had to do that then.
Have you sampled your own instruments yet, or
a little bit? Yeah. Nothing that I've released or whatever.
Okay, so it's just for yourself at the moment. Because I've sort of looked into it this year because I'm curious about how it's all done, and the scripting stuff just completely over my head. I don't think I'll get near it in the next 10 years. So yeah,
I'm not going to either. It's not up for me in terms of what is like exciting about music. Even though I would love to do it, it sounds cool, but yeah, it's not going to happen. Oh, who knows? We'll see.
What a learning curve. I mean, you think music's hard to learn. Yeah.
I work with some people that do DSP, digital signal processing, like coding. So they make synths, actual like the engines that drive synths, as well as various other plugins.
Right.
And it's a whole other thing. It's so crazy that there's this overlap between our worlds, which is the music itself, but those that are actually creating these digital instruments and effects and whatever. I mean, it's so far beyond whatever goes on in learning music. It's as to be completely alien. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yet we have to interface all the time. It's fascinating.
What I'm curious about is if they see those jobs as non-musical. You know how you're saying like
right.
the non-musical elements of this stuff. Do they see coding as non-musical, or do they look at script and say, "Oh, that's a really lovely legato there," or something? Or we can really bring out the music with that code. Like I'm really interested in that stuff. Like I said, I'll never get near it, but. So with the synth programming, does that mean like the engines are kind of there and ready to go, and then from that you make the sound from scratch, basically?
Exactly. I should rephrase. I say sound designing is what I'm doing. I'm not actually building the code that makes the synth. I'm using their tools to then make.
You're building the sound from the. Okay, right. Yeah, that's still what I need to learn. That one sounds a little easier than coding from scratch.
And it involves actually listening to notes and making artistic choices and whatever. So, that's sort of like the limit, perhaps, maybe even mixing, let's say, is the limit on how technical I want to get. Mixing for me is I only do it because I'm not going to pay somebody to do it. Basically, that's all. If I didn't have to do it, I would not do it. I enjoy putting reverb on things. It's cool. And that's about it. Beyond that, compression, and I learned all that, and I'm decent at it, but it's a matter of necessity.
Well done on understanding compression. I'm 2 years in, and I've just smiled and nodded at the screen every tutorial. It's the ratio stuff I can't get my head around.
It's so funny because I went to audio engineering school for a year after high school, and despite me skipping many classes, I did attend some on compression, and I use compressors, and they try to teach and so on. And I got out of that year, and I thought, I literally have no idea what I'm doing still. And a bunch of my classmates immediately make these websites, and they say hey, I'll mix your music and do this. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know how to do this better than you, and I have no idea what a compressor is or what it's even doing, despite focusing on it for like a year straight.
Yeah, no, I get that. That sounds like a little bit of imposter syndrome as well.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I bet a lot of composers have said this to you as well. Yeah.
Oh, no. It goes that way. And how do you feel about that? Do you experience any imposter syndrome in your current life these days?
24/7, yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't call myself just okay with calling myself a MIDI programmer, and I only call myself a composer, so that might get some jobs or work. But no, I don't feel comfortable calling myself a composer at all. Do you know what I mean? It's just you think I'm not a proper composer. I just try out some notes, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But no, all the time.
I'm not sure if there's any composers that do anything other than that. That seems to be the way.
Point. Maybe none of us are composers.
Yeah, maybe none of us. Have you ever considered uploading videos of you performing piano?
Yes, actually. There are some videos floating about of me playing classical straight piano, but really? I've just kind of started working out how to film my hands on the MIDI keyboard here. So I have been filming some little kind of both tutorials and live mock-ups just to kind of show my process. And like I said, I'm not 100% sure I could call myself a programmer yet, because I might put these online and then people will say, why on earth are you doing that? You could save a lot of time by doing this instead. But it's just really a kind of, here's what I do and here's the process in case it's useful for anyone.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because, isn't that the case with so many things, that to have needed to develop your own process has the advantage of potentially discovering whole new ways of doing things, and the disadvantage of doing something stupid for years that is completely pointless, that someone could solve in an instant. But unless you put your videos up and expose yourself, no one's going to tell you that.
Yeah, that's so true. And that circles back to what you said, about learning an instrument. If you can't do something, you find a way around it just through working it out yourself, and sometimes that opens up a whole new pathway. So yeah, exactly.
So when you're doing these things, if you're working with a solo instrument, like we were listening to the soprano sax there, what would you say are some of like the most important tips that you've come across in terms of realism and believability and all of this?
Yeah, it's a really, really tough one. I have been asked this before, how do you make mock-up sound realistic? And it's a really tricky one to answer. The only thing I've found is that I can't make it sound realistic if you hear things that are quantized, basically. That's just the first thing I think for me. I've recently been doing a piece that has lots of measured tremolos in, lots of kind of double string notes. And it's really hard to play those in time. Even with the tempo down, you get 2 notes for every note that you press. On recorded libraries, there's like a quarter of a second delay. It's really hard to play, but every time I just highlighted and clicked Q, and even humanizing afterwards, I just couldn't not make it sound like a computer. But then when I played it in badly and just shifted a few notes that were a little too bad, it sounded real. So I guess the first step, I think, or my best piece of advice is just play it in, even if you just use your thumb and play every note as the same note and adjust them in the piano roll afterwards. It's the sense of rhythm and just the sense of rhythm we have that a computer doesn't. So yeah, playing in is the number one way, I think, to make things sound realistic.
So you mentioned a couple of things there that I think we should just clarify, which is you are playing all these parts in. You're not drawing any of this stuff in. And is that the case for everything you do, or are there times when you do draw it in?
Yes and no. There are times where things are impossible. All the notes are played in. Basically, every note that appears on the piano roll is played in. But with the modulation lines, sometimes I needed an instant drop, and that can't be done with a wheel because it has to go through all the degrees to get to the bottom. So I'll draw those in. Sometimes if I'm in a hurry and I have a library like Cinematic Studio Strings, which is just like an unbelievably good strings library. But if you put the mod wheel down to 0, at least on my settings, the sound disappears completely. So sometimes I'll put the mod wheel down to 0, remember that the sound goes, and just open up the piano roll and drag it up to 1 at the end, just so there's a tail to the end of the note. But other than that, it's mostly just either slowly done or at speed with the mod wheel.
Okay, so that's the other point. You're saying that you're actually changing the tempo in the DAW and playing to a click?
Nowadays, yes. I didn't originally, but I think Star Wars was the first thing I had a proper go at, and I did start that without the metronome, and then a few bars in, I realised I couldn't keep 40 instruments together without a sense of pulse. However, if there's a kind of strong percussion part in something, like I think with The Incredibles, I may have even just put a drum loop or whatever I did for that, drum loop and shakers or something, done that first, and then use that as the beat, if that makes sense. I don't know, even in classical music, in playing an instrument, I'm hesitant to use the metronome. I don't know why. I'm not so keen on it.
It's totally understandable. And I'll always want to play to a real drum groove over a click any day, because there's so many what's the word I'm looking for? Whatever.
It's like
small
nuances.
Notes in between. Slight nuances, changing in tempo, changing in whatever, and so many divisions are being hit on that it's not just a quarter note pulse. There's all sorts of inner things that make you move and feel in certain ways. And if that's not there, you don't really know what to do, or you're just guessing.
Yeah, glad that's not just me then. That's excellent.
Yeah. But this thing of putting the tempo way down, this isn't something I'm never doing, and never even crossed my mind. Literally, in all the years that I've ever been doing any of this, never occurred to me. So that's pretty cool.
Yes, but there's a catch. If you put the tempo too far down, you play like a saxophone solo is the perfect example of this. You play a brilliant kind of slow beat saxophone solo, and then when you put the tempo up, it doesn't suit at all because you've played it in a slower style. So it's, I don't know, I can't remember what the phrase is, but it's risky to put the tempo down because it changes the way you feel the music. But another thing on tempo is I see lots of kind of straight lines between 2 points, as in a perfectly consistent slow down and speed up. And I try and avoid that and just do it like a ladder or kind of steps, just because it would never happen that a tempo would perfectly speed up in time. And actually, while we're doing how to make mock-ups realistic tips, just change the tempo every 2 bars by 1 or 2 beats. And we feel that. We don't necessarily hear it and recognize it, but our internal pulse will feel that whether we know it or not. And then suddenly it's not a computer playing, because it was 101 BPM in bar 1, and then halfway through bar 2 it's 102 BPM. So yeah, just something simple like changing the tempo every now and then adds a bit of realism.
It's a great idea. And all of this basically falls under the philosophy, let's say, of put detail in everything. Every aspect of the thing needs to have this flowing, ever-changing, it's never static quality. As soon as one element becomes static for too long, we know this is something unnatural. This doesn't really ever happen.
Yeah.
It's the same thing in the synth programming and making these presets. If you want believable synth sounds, they need to wiggle in every capacity, volume and filter and pitch, and constantly everything that you can modulate should be modulating, even if just the tiniest little bit, because it's so amazing how we pick up on these micro details. Well, pick up on them, subconsciously pick up on them anyway.
That's so funny you say that. It's identical to MIDI programming with the notes and stuff. One straight line in the modulation, and suddenly your ear's drawn to it, and you go, "That's weird. Why hasn't that musician moved an inch or a millimeter even?" Because it's just a sine wave in the end. The tempo, the modulation, the variety is everything, isn't it? Like. That's the secret to making it sound not like a computer, is just make sure every single note is cared for and that there's constant variety.
And this is a lesson that perhaps you learned quickly because of A, the type of music you're trying to do mock-ups for, and B, your background already. I know that many people that come to production and composing on the computer early on, we're so anxious to create something that the idea of spending all this time to poetically go into every little detail is simply not on the table at that moment. It's just, I just want to get something. I just want to make something and release or hear or whatever, right? And not saying don't do that. You can only do what you can do. You only do what makes sense to you. But the secret for all of this, and this goes not just for programming, but for playing instruments, for everything, is this hyper detailed, everything matters approach,
Yep.
to an extent. It's my sense anyway.
I think so, yeah. That's definitely how like professional classical musicians look at everything. They'll never just ignore a note or think, oh, it doesn't matter, it's a fast note or whatever. Every single note is cared for. And yeah, I think that's a useful thing to, if you have the time, to think with MIDI programming, the micro management as well as the macro management.
Now, this gets into a conversation that I wanted to have with you about, depending on the terminology that makes sense to you, where does the soul or emotion or humanity or whatever of music come into MIDI-based music, and not just orchestral and whatever, but of any kind? What do you have to say about that? Is it even possible to have, if someone listens to this Monsters Inc. thing, I wonder what they think if I hadn't said my spiel ahead of time, Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's another instrument, isn't it? It's the musician behind the instrument that's pouring their heart and soul into it. I remember reading an interview with a composer, I think it might have been Hans Zimmer actually, when they said, what instrument do you play? And he said, what are you talking about? My instrument is the computer. And I would have thought, that's bonkers at the time. I didn't understand it. But then when I did come to do programming, it makes sense. Like, we strive for realism in emulating instruments and stuff, and that's great, and it really helps. But I wonder if, the next big thing might be that you want it to sound virtual, like they are their own instruments. And then if you want to hear a real orchestra, you can just go to a concert hall or, listen on Spotify or whatever. But yeah, virtual instruments are their own thing. And I completely see what the person was saying when they said, the computer is my instrument.
It makes total sense to me. It's something that I've also felt for a long time. The computer is its own instrument, and it's its own art form that has its own potentials that are not potentials in playing an instrument. This opens up this unbelievably vast well of potential.
Yes, and sorry to interrupt you there, because I've just thought of one. For example, the harp you can't just sit at a keyboard and play. You can't sit at a harp and play as you would on a keyboard. But in a DAW, DAW, you can play anything on the harp with this MIDI keyboard. And to be honest, 99% of listeners wouldn't go, hang on, those pedals were in the wrong position. There's no way that scale can... And no one knows. It's just, you can treat it like a keyboard and it sounds great in the background.
I know.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off there.
It
just came to me.
No, that's a perfect example. And I really love that, because there's no reason not to do that. There's no reason actually to even play these instruments as they were intended at all. Like, why? Unless you're going to try to make that sound, of course. Like, we now have the possibility to use all these whatever you want orchestral textures, let's say, but they could just do anything. And why not do that? Like, that opens up a new world of sonic possibility that is probably not going to happen in the traditional realm. Now you can record your harp. You can then bounce it to audio, make it go double speed, pitch it up an octave, put it in 2 ears, put a filter on it. Like, why not? You can do it.
Are we far enough along with virtual instruments that there are kind of purists yet that say, no, you must play it exactly as a harp should play? Or
I'm sure that's coming, yeah. That's very funny.
I'll be one of them in 20 years, I bet.
Yeah, right, yeah. Wow. So, okay, now, when you're actually making original compositions, when you're composing in proper, what is your general process at first? Like, are you, and this may vary, yes, probably does, are you initially motivated harmonically, melodically, rhythmically, and how do you even go about starting a piece?
No idea, honestly. I think it's an easy one to say harmonically first. I really struggle to construct melodies, and the best I've managed is just lots of motifs that I was happy with. But I struggle with melodies. That's all inspiration for me, I think. Harmony I'm much more comfortable with, and it's something I've done a lot of practice with and a lot of reading into. And rhythm's probably the weakest of the three of those elements. But to start a composition, I've only ever done kind of one or two just free compositions. I guess those electronic pieces you mentioned are, but it's just from playing Rocket League in college and remembering the kind of style of the menu music. But yeah, I think media composition is a good place to start because you always have something to accompany or something to write for, to kind of draw inspiration from. But free composition I find really, really hard. Yeah, not sure where to start with that.
It's a really interesting point about the inspiration for a piece, and no doubt having some sort of visual or even conceptual reference point that can work as some sort of compass, where you can say, is this decision I'm making in alignment with my compass or not? It gives you some way to say yes or no. Whereas in free composition, what do you say?
Yeah.
I guess I'll do this.
It's like have you heard of this choice paradox thing where the more choices you have, the harder it is to choose? Yeah, I think free composition is that basically. Where do you go from? And I find that when people give themselves limitations to it, like I'm not going to go beyond the range of these notes, I won't use more than 3 instruments, they come up with much more coherent and much better pieces of music than blank canvas. Where do I even start, kind of thing. So
there's no doubt about it. Limitation is almost essential.
Yeah.
And
we love
in the
rules.
past, seriously, and in the past, those rules are imposed upon us by the physicality of the instrument and our ability level, as well as perhaps the players we know. You might want to play whatever up-tempo jazz fusion, but you don't know anybody that can play, so you're not playing it, Whereas now, I sit here in my thing and I'm like, I want some up-tempo jazz fusion, and I sit down for a few hours and there it is, right?
Yeah.
But I need to put those limitations on myself and say, this is the sandbox that I'm playing in, I don't play outside of this right now, because everybody has to learn that at some point. If you don't set rules for yourself, even when you're given a gig, and they say, just do whatever you want, make something, we want to hear your thought. Okay. So then you have to be the one to say, these are the boundaries and we play within them, because you'll do something.
Yeah,
something great.
100%. It's a problem for piano players, especially actually if someone says, play us something. I never know what to play. I've played piano for 26 years now, and I never even know what to start with wherever anyone says it. Oh, just play us something. So yeah, every piano player should have kind of 3 go-to pieces for those situations.
I know the feeling too on guitar. It's exactly the same way. I feel like, especially having been a teacher, as you are yourself, we have played so many pieces of music that we would never even choose to play on our own, Yeah. And most of them, I shouldn't say most of them, some of them are still in there somewhere. And all I need is something, and then bang, oh, here it is. Of course, I can play this entire thing, from front to back. But when someone says like, oh, just play us something, a family gathering or whatever, I sit down and I'm like, I have no idea what to play. Just start improvising, I guess, and see what happens.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, do you feel like you're generally, at least in music, are you more generally intellectually driven, or are you more intuitively driven? Or is it balanced?
Intuitive, yeah. I don't think I'm an intelligent musician. I wasn't very good at musicology, and it's just something I'm kind of getting interested in now. I was always more kind of better at the oral side of stuff and the performance side of stuff. So yeah, intuition, 80-20 for now. But the more I read about the history and the theory, probably the more that ratio will change. Good question.
And when you were studying, because I of course didn't take a classical route at all, other than just briefly play this here and there. And when you were learning theory from that perspective, how was that being integrated for you? Was it something that you were actually interested in? Because a lot of the time, a lot of the more in-depth nuts and bolts, so to speak, of like, how is this working, is not so important on a performance level. It is to whatever extent, but it's much more important perhaps on a compositional level, especially if one doesn't have a strong ear or intuitive sense. So when you were coming up and learning all that stuff, as I'm sure you probably must have when you were in college or whatever, what was your experience of that?
Yes, yeah, really good point. And definitely at the time, I would have just thought, it's just essays and that stuff. And you could say the history is maybe not the most important thing if you just want to be a performer. But, then when you go and read up about it, it sometimes, well, most of the time changes the way you see the music. And from the theory side of things, mainly structure, like understanding how pieces of music are constructed and what their form is. That is so important to know, because you know then where the punctuation goes in the music and where the chapters are, and therefore so does your listener. Like if you have no idea of the structure of the piece, nor will the person you're performing it to. And actually that same goes for the kind of soul you put into it, or the kind of intuition. If you're not sure what you think about the piece, your listener won't be sure either. You have to be 100% you know what you want to say with the music before you perform it, so that whoever's listening, you can communicate it to whoever's listening. Goes back to the first question. But of the theory and history stuff, definitely structure is top of the list, because it just helps you. If you compare a long piece of music to running a marathon, helps you pace yourself and know how fast to run at each bit.
That's so fascinating. I would have never imagined you say that of all the things, that structure was the top of the list. And it makes total sense to me. And I think for myself growing up, I was, in a rock context early on, rock and pop and whatever. The structure came as a matter of course because the songs are just whatever they are. There's an intro and there's a this and there's and so on. And just through playing them, hundreds of them, it somehow got into me about how the structure works. Whereas in your world, these long form structures are so much more difficult in a certain sense to deal with, to build and maintain interest and to develop into whatever, this in the basic pop song structure model, or even the basic electronic music song structure model, or even the jazz song structure model, head, solo head, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It's very clearly delineated, like there's just this and there's this and there's this. And it's 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes long, ish. Yeah. Not this is half an hour, what are you going to do,
Yeah. Although from the other side, you have a good half an hour to play with to say what you want to say. Whereas for songs that you would have done that are, 3 minutes or so, you've got so little time to say what you want to say, and it's got to be spot on, no room for kind of waffling in a 2-3 minute song.
That's a good point. And it is very evident in my life due to these music production challenges that I do every week or 2 weeks. And I set a limit, 90 seconds every piece needs to be 90 seconds. And these are little explorations into various areas of music. And that was very challenging for me in the beginning, to make 90-second pieces of music that get a point across and are what they're supposed to be. It's a limitation that's been imposed by, I can't sit around and listen to 30 people, 20 people write 5-minute songs on a stream. So we need to make it short, but it makes you do things all different. Every single decision that you're considering is now pushed up against this limit and says, is this possible? Is this possible?
And did you find yourself thinking firstly about structure when you were told 90 seconds? Did you think, here's how I'm going to plot this? Because
exactly.
I'm thinking back to like essays and things now, when you say, I'm going to do my introduction here, I'm going to talk about this here, I'm going to talk about this here, and then my conclusion. It's fun. Yeah,
exactly. It plays a huge part in it. And funny enough, the tempo plays a huge part in it too, because slow tempo, 70, 60, whatever, this is, you've gotten in like 2 bars and already you've taken whatever it is, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and you're like, damn, I can't even get past my intro in 90 seconds.
That's a good point. Yeah. Right, slow stuff, and yeah.
Improvisation and composition is something that I wanted to touch on as well. And before we get into that, what is the role or is there any degree of prominence of improvisation in your life musically?
I sort of see improvisation as composition, as in I find it hard to separate them, because most of my composition stuff has just come from kind of doodling ideas, improvising ideas. I don't think I've ever sat down and kind of, academically worked out how to write a piece of music. It's just all from improv, really. And I used to hate it, but the older I get, the more I enjoy it. And as an organist, you have to improvise a fair bit. If you have to, I think they call it wallpaper music, where you just have to keep music going in the background, basically. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't really make a huge distinction between improv and composition just yet.
I should say do you take any time to simply sit and doodle, to just play and let sandcastles be sandcastles, and you're just playing for the fun of it and it's gone? Or are you more often strictly composing, strictly learning and performing a piece?
No, I'm 100% flashes of inspiration, turn voice memos on and just improvise for a bit. And honestly, my voice memos is like thousands of things long, and it just says like, minor, A minor, something, and possible idea kind of thing. And I'll happily sit for 2 hours if I'm in the zone. But to be kind of forced to do it on a deadline is really tough. And I find it quite stressful anyway. As enjoyable as it is, it's much more enjoyable to just kind of do it in your own time. And when you think, oh yeah, I'm really in the mood to write something. And it's the same for practice as well. Like, if you're practicing an instrument, it's really tough to practice if you don't really feel in the mood to practice. But sometimes you hear a piano piece and go, right, I want to quickly practice the piano, and now's the time. And it's hard to do if you're not in the zone, basically.
So there's an interesting topic there, because your line of work puts you in a position of learning many pieces, having to practice them and perform them, as well as getting to be around a lot of people who are in the learning process. Mm-hmm. Can you first just maybe, because we had a talk before, so I know what it is that you do, but can you just go over that again for anybody listening now? What is it that you do?
So my Monday to Friday job is at a music school in the UK called Chetham's, which is in Manchester, and I work as I think my official title is staff accompanist or staff collaborative pianist, and there's 5 of us in the school, and our job is to kind of coach students through the pieces that they're learning, like instrumentalists, like clarinetists, and singers as well. They'll come to us with piano scores and say, I'm learning this violin sonata, here's the piano part, can we play it in a concert in a month or whatever? And then we kind of meet up every week and hear them play it, and then suggest ways of improving their version of the piece or making their performance more convincing. And as a result, I work with kind of most of the main instruments every week, regularly, which probably helps a lot when it comes to virtual instruments. But it's a lot of the time it's pieces of music we've never heard before, and sometimes it's pieces we know well. But practice-wise, a lot of the repertoire I've played already, which really helps. So a lot of the time it's just refreshing, rather than learning anything really difficult from scratch. So,
I see. And so, having all this experience being around, how old are the people that you're working with?
Sort of 7 to 18, 19, I think. So big range. Okay. I have sort of 40 to 50 students each.
I see. Wow. So a lot of people, of course, coming up, not just in instrumental practice, but in production and whatever, are wanting to get good fast, right? Everybody wants to be good now, yesterday.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on practice and learning, and anything surrounding that in terms of self-discipline, in terms of whatever? I'm curious just to hear you riff on that a bit, because you have so much experience seeing these students perhaps succeed, struggle yourself. Anything come to mind there?
Get good fast. Just listen to Bach, isn't it? Just keep listening to Bach until you get it, and then that's it. You get music. From a technical view, as in improving your technique of an instrument and stuff, it's tough to do scales and exercises and things, so I'd never send anyone that way. But always remember that technique is just a tool to make the sounds you want to make, basically. It's not just robotic, mechanical programming your fingers to play the instrument. It's a way of achieving the sound you want in as healthy a way as possible, basically. So there is no kind of, it's not just scales and robotic stuff. Getting good fast.
Is it even possible?
I don't know. I've seen a lot of YouTube videos that say it is, but in my experience, I've not found the secret method other than just listen and practice and listen and practice. Most important thing is that you enjoy it. I mean, the top world's best pianists will sit down at a piano and just do nothing but play slow chords and just absolutely find find the sound they want, rather than going, repeat that phrase, repeat it slowly, repeat it backwards kind of thing. They'll just sit and just literally just play the piano and just listen. And yeah, I think that's the stage you want to get to, where your practice sessions are something you enjoy rather than a chore.
100% agree. And you kind of touch on this exploratory aspect of being so caught up in the desire to achieve a certain result can blind you to the thing in itself, just being with, whether it's production or whether it's an instrument, and the joy of just exploring what it is, in its own way, like a child just saying, oh, what if I do this? And what if I do this? And what if I do this? And there's something that goes on there that simply cannot be replicated or put into a book in any way. You cannot memorize that. You cannot tell somebody that.
Yeah.
And so often the important techniques that characterize, whatever, a person that you're interested in emulating or some, I don't know, whatever you're trying to learn. Yeah, there's some grand overall thing. This is roughly how you do it. But all of the intricacies are so specific and nuanced, and there's a million of them, and you can't tell someone, how to do them.
It's so funny you say that, actually, and that kind of circles back to the virtual instruments and a computer being an instrument. But actually, if you play a real acoustic instrument, it's the vibrations that you feel and that you just can almost never be replicated kind of on a computer. Like, think about how many piano VSTs, how many virtual pianos there are, but you would know instantly playing a piano just from feeling the vibrations. And there is something to be said, even if you don't play the instrument, for just exploring it, like you say, and just kind of getting a feel for what it can do and the sounds you can produce. And as long as you enjoy playing it, practice is easy and getting better is very fast. Same with the mock-ups, like I said, if you enjoy the music you're mocking up, time flies when you have fun, basically.
No kidding. Yeah, there's something important about that experience of really interacting with a physical instrument, and not just in the vibratory sense, but also in the rhythmic sense of having to actually play the music in time. When you're working entirely within a DAW, this is not really a factor, depending on how you do things. Yeah. And in a way, well, in a strong way, that necessity of being there, and that note's got to happen now. There's this. You don't have time to think about it, and in that lack of time, something happens where your whole being is being used. You're physically touching, you're hearing. There's an artistic sensibility, there's an intellectual sensibility, and some of that I don't think is really replicable in a DAW environment. You need this. Yeah,
you're right, and like you say, it's too easy with a click track, isn't it? The metronome. You don't necessarily have to learn these things. Do you have Dalcroze in Canada and the US?
I don't know what that is.
It's I think I've got it right. Dalcroze. It's a kind of method of learning rhythms through kind of physicality and like throwing and catching tennis balls in time and stuff. And we did a bit of it at college, and I think I just laughed it off, like I'm not going to catch a ball to learn how to play a piano piece. And again, the older I get and the more I learn about it, the more I think it's genius and really, really helps with natural sense of rhythm. So yeah, I think that'd be another get good fast, is look into Dalcroze.
It's a good point. I have a friend who is bass player, and his rhythm is just bonkers. It's the thing for him, what he really, really loves. Yeah. And so he does this tennis ball thing, and he was showing me one year, like, stamping in place and doing polyrhythms with the ball against the wall and bouncing on the ground and on the wall and this hand and that hand. And I thought, damn, I'm not sitting here doing that, but in theory, it seems like I got to be doing that.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
It's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
We talked about the way that being a classical musician has influenced your perception of DAW work, music production work. But do you see anything going the other way now that you've done all this programming and even just the conception of the whole workflow? Has that affected how you listen to or appreciate or think of traditional music?
Yes, because orchestration has become so accessible. Like you say, it's all there on the computer. You don't necessarily need to book well, pay 10 grand to just hear how a piece might sound. You can perfect it on the computer or do your best to perfect it and then send it off to the live musicians. In terms of it, I'm not sure that the process of mocking up and the computer itself has helped, but it's just the accessibility that the computer gives that's helped. I've learned so much about orchestration and composition in the last 2 years. It's just amazing that what you have at your fingertips with this amazing technology is.
I would agree. The ability to render something, to render an idea, and actually hear it roughly as it would be, in not too much time, is something that composers of the past would probably be like, this is cheating. You can't
and
do
it's
that.
not just the DAWs like Keybase and Logic and stuff. There's this kind of AI engine-based tech called Note Performer. I don't know if you've come across this one.
No.
It's like it basically plays scores from Sibelius and Dorico and stuff. Is it Dorico? One of the notation softwares. And it sounds really good, like really good. And it's just kind of, I think it's AI just looking at a score and going, that's how that should go, following the instructions.
Oh, really? I'd have to hear that. I mean, I wonder if, are you saying that it's not running it as MIDI into instruments and playing them back, but is actually generating waveforms out of the score?
I think it is virtual instruments, I think. I have to ask someone more knowledgeable on that. I'm pretty sure it's all virtual instruments. I think it is all, modeled / synth versions of instruments rather than live recordings of real players, I think. But I better not talk more about that because I don't know that much about it.
It's okay.
But what I know is that it sounds really good, as in sounds better than if you'd have to know what you were doing at a DAW to make it sound better than the Note Performer.
What was the name?
Note Performer, I think. I think
Performer.
it might be a Dorico or a Sibelius thing, or maybe all of them. I don't know.
Okay, I'll check it out. So, okay, this makes me think about reading music and notation in general. And, in my world, this is not a thing. It's not a thing as far as I'm not doing it. And also it's not a thing as far as a lot of people in my position are not doing it or even having a need to do it. And that being said, I did learn to read when I was young, and I still can read, but it's very, very slow. And I never read because I don't have any reason to in my life, basically, for what I do. Yeah. And I'm curious, A, what do you think about that? And what has been the role of reading in your life? Because I've spoken to some classical musicians that read like just bonkers. I cannot believe it. Perhaps you're one of them. And I can imagine the effect that has on one's whole mindset and musicality and everything. So, I mean, what do you got to say about reading?
Yeah, that's a topic I've seen come up a lot. And it's hard to put into words what it does for you, actually, reading music. I mean, it is, I've seen some people say, I can just read the piano roll, but it's not quite the same. And there are things that sheet music can tell you that a piano roll can't. And surely it's easier to read 5 lines rather than look at an entire piano keyboard vertically. Like, I know a piano keyboard really well, and I'd rather read 5 lines than 88 keys. So for one, it's once you've learnt it, it's quicker. I guess I've never seen anyone that got really good at reading sheet music say, I wish I hadn't bothered, basically. Everyone I know that reads music has found that it improved them as a musician by one way or another. And it's kind of like what I was saying with things I didn't understand. Synths, I still don't really understand synths, to be honest, but I'm doing my best. Synths, mixing, mastering, I would have just kind of gone, whatever, when I was playing the piano. But, the more you learn about it, the more it just sparks ideas in your head, and you realise how all these things come together. And sheet music reading is one of those things, I think. It's always the people that haven't done it that say no one needs it. Those that can do it and have learnt it properly say, yes, this is great. It's 100% worth it.
That's the way, isn't it? There's so many things like that. And as someone coming up in the modern world of all this technology, and depending on the kind of music someone wants to make, that's a decision that if you're not in the traditional, even if you play an instrument, but you're not in a traditional path of learning it, you're going to need to consciously decide to do that. Sit down and be like, I'm going to learn to do this. Where if you do that from a young age, man, that makes a huge difference. You're just 100%. Forced to do it, so to speak.
Yeah, that one is like learning to speak a language, isn't it? I think it's up to the age of 13 you can be as good as a native speaker, kind of thing. And I bet that's the same for reading and writing music on the page as well. But like any language, you can still learn it at any point. It just goes quicker if you're younger. I'm just trying to think of things that you can't put in MIDI, as far as I know. Phrase marks, can you put those in a piano roll? Like things that tell you how a piece of music is structured. You can put, I guess, I don't know, can you put double bars in or repeat bars? I guess you could do a loop, but then
that's the thing, right? Is that in the MIDI world, when you're working in a DAW, it's not as though you only have the piano roll to look at. Of course, there's the entire arrangement set out in blocks. There's all your bar lines. There's your blah, blah, blah. So you are getting fed information from different sources. And as someone who now, due to my work, I've had to look at piano rolls for an ungodly amount of time. I mean, it's just sickening. But I am one of those people that can read them, but I couldn't sit down and play a piece in real time. I couldn't sight read a piece by looking at a piano roll. I actually should try that, honestly. Maybe I can. I don't actually know.
I'm curious to try it as well.
Yeah, that's kind of funny. But I totally get your point. It makes complete sense. It's just hard, perhaps, for so many people of the modern time, in my world anyway, to find some motivation to do that. There'd have to be some strong reason that says, this is why.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if it genuinely isn't like useful to the career you're in or whatever, then that's obviously absolutely fair enough. I mean, I mean, learning Japanese would be amazing, but it's not at the moment. It's not, as far as I know, it's not useful to my career. Although I have had Japanese students in the past. Maybe, yeah. Anyway, learning the sheet music, it gives you access to, basically instant access to all the titans of music history, right back to the very beginning of notation. And a lot of it just cannot be translated onto a piano roll without, however many CC lines you need, and you wouldn't be able to read them all at the same time. Whereas you can just, use one Italian term and print it on the music along with an articulation and a dynamic marking or something. Let me think of something that would have to be seen on the music. I suppose you could put text into a DAW, but there's a great Ravel piece. In fact, it's a kind of suite of pieces called Gaspard de la Nuit, and it's I think there's actually synths based on these three pieces by Teletone Audio. That's a sidetrack there. They're amazing. But anyway, I think if I've remembered it rightly, the first movement is Ondine, and it's about this kind of water goddess, and there's a poem printed at the beginning. And Ravel, who couldn't play the piano that well, has written just an unbelievably brilliant piece of music. It's beyond genius. But at the end, like when the water goddess has kind of exploded in rage and just gone away, there's this marking at the end for the last few bars that says, to be played as if nothing had ever happened, kind of thing. How do you put that in a piano roll? And it is a direct link to what the composer felt in the music. And suddenly it just transforms the way you play the ending. You don't think, what shall I put the BPM down to? You start visualizing what the composer had in mind, as if nothing had ever happened, kind of thing. And it's little bits like that. Like the French were really good at this in the 20th century. Like Poulenc says stuff like surrounded with a halo of sonority or something, or swimming in sustain pedal. Like how do you do it on a piano roll? That's on or off sustain, 127 or 0. And if you've got a really good piano, like half sustain pedal at some points, but swimming in a halo of sound with the sustain pedal, or a kaleidoscope, I think he calls it at one point, of colours. It's that stuff that you'd have to kind of maybe insert text box and type, and then at the end of the day, it's just how long do you put the CC pedal line down for? But
totally, that's so funny. And I guess in your world, you're often using your reading skill, I mean, if not almost exclusively, for the purposes of being able to perform something.
100%.
As opposed to the purposes of notating your own work, or the purposes of composing itself,
Yes and no. I have tiny little notebooks with scores on them, and sometimes if it's just too complicated for me to do in my head, I know how it sounds, but I can't do it part by part. I'll just check it on the piano and write it down to be sure. But yeah, the main reason for reading scores is that I do it all day, basically. Yeah.
So when someone comes up and they're not trying to be a performer, perhaps that's a crucial distinction. Then I still feel like the ability to read music is exceptionally beneficial to a musical mind in general, but probably becomes quite difficult to work out the momentum to even do it, because there isn't that direct purpose of like, I'm going to perform even for my family, if that's not a thing for you, right? Yeah, it's kind of fun.
100%. If there isn't that direct, like not instant, but sort of instant advantage to your musical life, then it's hard to motivate yourself. But it is worth it. I mean, I'm thinking of loads of things now that wouldn't translate well to a DAW, but it's a whole other video, I think.
Yeah. And for me, I wish my sight reading was faster so that I could study. That's really where the benefit is for me. I would love to study so much music more quickly. Instead, what I end up doing is just doing it by ear. I'm just listening to classical pieces and working out the harmony and what the bass is doing and so on, which is its own benefit, of course, is doing it all by ear, of course. But there's some certain times when I feel like I don't really want to also be working on my ear right now I just want to get this one particular thing. If I could just open this and just start going, man, it would transform my life of study. But, the work now in order to get to that point is so prohibitive that I'm like, whatever, just use my ear.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that as well.
Yeah. Are you still, would you say you're still learning today? I don't mean learning pieces, but studying music. Obviously, we talk about the synth thing and you're doing the DAW thing now. And how do you view that for yourself?
Yes, every day. Even the classical stuff. I mean, it's endless. You can always hear new music. And I've definitely heard a couple of pieces in the last decade or so where I've really sat up and gone, that's amazing. I can't believe I hadn't heard that before. And similarly with new contemporary classical stuff as well. It's easy, like I said, to be a grumbling audience member and say, oh, what's this rubbish? But sometimes you just get bits of genius. Like there's 2 pieces I've mocked up this year, classical pieces for classical composers. And they're both amazing stuff I would definitely listen to in my spare time if I listen to music. Sorry, what was the original question? I got sidetracked.
Are you still learning?
Still studying, yeah. So I think I mentioned this before. I feel like I've developed more as a musician from learning, a few months of mixing and mastering and synth and electronic stuff than I have of the last few years of listening to classical, which I've done all my life anyway. It is about, for me, development as a musician is about broadening your horizons and learning new things. Which is probably why I'm keen to get people to read music and listen to classical stuff if they're from different backgrounds. Just through, listening to new genres, the more you listen, the more you understand. The more you understand, the more it benefits your own development.
Of course, makes total sense. So when you were a teenager then, you mentioned, I think earlier on, you were considering trying to be a concert pianist. Was that your actual intention going through high school? Did you achieve that intention to some degree? And what happened?
Yeah, sort of. I think that was probably my intention. Went to college, went through the usual hoops of doing competitions and lots of concerts. And then I think somewhere down the road, I just realised I like making music with other people more than just playing the piano by myself. And so I got really into accompaniment and chamber music, which is how I ended up with this staff accompanist role at Cheatham's. But yeah, as amazing as it is to play piano on your own, and it's some of the greatest music ever written for solo keyboard, I found it personally more fun to share that with other musicians. So I got more into that and stopped doing the solo stuff so much. Also, I found I hated nerves, and it's always so nerve-wracking playing on your own, basically. But,
no kidding.
Yeah.
And so do you have any involvement in music playing with others in a jamming capacity as opposed to in a practiced, rehearsed capacity?
If I do, I probably will have deleted it from my memory as soon as I could. Just trying to think back. Yes and no. I mean, I've played in swing bands and jazz bands and session bands, I think they're called, like kind of where you're one of 2 keyboard players and there's loads of instruments and drums and stuff around you. So I guess that was sort of jamming, but no, not really. I haven't done a lot of that yet. Perhaps when I'm older.
Interesting, because for me, this is also an area where it can't be replicated. This in a book or anything, or even sitting at a DAW, or even by yourself, of this real time pushing back and forth with other people, looking. They look at you, you look, you do this, they do that. And yes, and navigating this in real time, and then you laugh and you blah blah blah, and it all just ends right. There's something there about this flowing movement that you can't find anywhere else.
Okay, I have actually, that does ring a bell. This is going to sound so nerdy though. Like when any of my students play Baroque or early concertos, kind of expected is for you to decorate these lines, especially in slow movements. You're supposed to add loads of your own bits and loads of your own kind of ornamentation, just trills and turns and stuff. And when they do something, I'll copy it when the orchestra has it. And so I guess that's sort of jamming, but like I said, it's really nerdy. I'm generally quite shy, so improvising and jamming with other people in front of people, I'm not quite there yet. And I don't know. Yeah, one day.
Got it. So now that you're at the point that you are, and you're working at the school, and you're doing this MIDI mock-up work and the composition stuff. By the way, I think that's really cool that that a classical or a composer of any kind hired you just to do a mock-up of the piece. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's right. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to main in, if that's a verb at the moment. Because the composition just scares me too much. But programming, I love it because I feel like I'm getting better at it, and I understand the music I'm given. If it's given to me in sheet music format. I feel as a performer, that's my primary thing. As a performer, I can help the composers make their music sound as good as I possibly can, basically, if that makes sense.
I would have thought that I would have come across that either as a gig for myself or as people I know that are doing it, but honestly, I haven't. This just making mock-ups for people and not for film score or for anything, but but just for performance pieces.
Not that I know of. Yeah, I've only done 2 or 3 so far, and they've all been kind of just classical pieces, and they've all been amazing. Like I said earlier, it's tedious if you're programming stuff you don't like, but everything I've been sent has just really opened my eyes to new pieces of music. There's one guy that sent me some stuff who's got a symphony on YouTube, and it's great. Listen to all of it. But this strings piece, it has one section in it. It's probably one of the best things I've heard for about good, like sort of 10 years. There's just this amazing bit of music out of nowhere in the middle of it.
Okay, well, after you, please send it to me.
I'll see. Hopefully should be done with it in the next month or 2, and it'll be online anyway. But yeah.
So at this point, then that's your focus. You're trying to, and this is just a secondary thing, or you want this to be a primary thing?
I'd love for the programming to be a primary thing. Composition is I have more composing work than programming work at the moment, but I'd like to change that slightly, just because composing scares me so much. Like, what if I don't come up with something by the deadline? Luckily, it's never happened. Just I've pulled the odd all-nighter to get stuff done. I'm sure most working composers have. But what do you do if you haven't come up with anything? Like, do you ring them and say, "I'm so sorry, I couldn't think of anything"?
What else are you going to do?
This bit will be silent, I'm afraid.
Exactly.
I'll play something slow, I guess.
It's a funny thing, hey, when you're given timelines to do creative tasks and you don't have any control over what comes to you at any given time, and it just is whatever it is. And that's the funny thing with doing composition is if you sat down to compose that piece literally an hour later, or let alone the next day or next week or next year, it would be completely different. In 1 minute, you just touch one thing and it says, and away it goes in some direction. Start again, 100%. It's completely different.
And then you get to the end of the piece and think, I could never write that again. I don't know what happened there. I don't know how I came up with that. I've just done 7 minutes of some episode or something. I couldn't do that again in 10 years if you asked me. Just there and then got it right. And
I know.
Just my ultimate fear 24/7 is that I'm going to run out of inspiration before the deadline's up, basically.
It's so funny, yeah. I don't know. I feel like that's kind of the fun in a way. I like a little bit of that. I like a little bit of
Why do we do it to ourselves, basically?
I know, yeah. I know, it's funny.
Every single gig, never again. I'm never composing again. You finish it, you're like, I love that. How do I get my next one? I'll write to some directors and stuff, yeah.
I know.
It's mad.
Okay, so if people want to hire you, they're going to do that, what, through your website?
No idea, actually. Yeah, I just actually, my wife does web design, and she's done me this cool website, which is kind of looking like a Logic project at the moment. So maybe people will go on that. I don't know. Mostly YouTube. I think I did this Star Wars mock-up and posted it on Twitter, and it went on my phone the next day. Was just loads of notifications. Whereas there are much better mock-ups than mine of that same piece on YouTube. I think there's the one by a guy called Sammy, a French guy called Sammy. I can't remember the name of his YouTube channel, but it's like a perfect replica of the Star Wars theme, and I wouldn't even know how to get anywhere near doing that. You wouldn't know it wasn't the real recording. I think there's a video where he kind of, do you call it A/B, where you swap between two things, where A/B's between the live recording and his mock-up, and it's seamless. It's absolutely extraordinary. But yeah, for some reason on Twitter, it just sort of blew up overnight, and I got lots of emails and stuff saying, "Can you do this? And can you mock this up?" And
Cool. Yeah. I mean, why does the internet? Who knows, right? It just does what it does somehow.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. And okay, so the website is what? SimonPassmore.com?
That's it. Yeah, easy to remember.
So I'll put that in the description. I'm going to put your YouTube in the description. And if anybody's listening to this and you're into virtual instruments, classical music, orchestral music, programming, whatever, it's a no-brainer. You're doing tutorials. You're planning to do even more tutorials, right? People are asking for that.
Yeah, getting there. It's a faff recording it and editing it, as I'm sure you know. It just takes so much time. Like if it was just playing and other people watching, that'd be easy. But it's all the editing and uploading, and it takes serious time for voluntary work.
And the funny thing with planning out a video lesson or tutorial, as opposed to doing a lesson with a person in real time, where there's this organic movement back and forth. There's this quality of having to sit down and say, okay, what is it that I'm actually trying to do here with this tutorial, trying to say, and how is it that I actually even do this? Because a lot of the time you don't even really know what it is or how you're doing it. And that's obviously the role of a teacher, is to break down this process into some digestible steps, even though those steps are not there for you when you're doing them, right? It's not a quantized thing. It's whatever it is, and then you have to say something.
100%. It's so hard to put into words. I'm doing my best, and I probably do little notes on my phone as much as I do the voice memos, just saying like, oh yeah, this is how to make it sound like, a proper pizzicato being played or something, or just occasionally I'll go, oh yeah, that's how that's done. And it'll just come to me on my journey into work or whatever, and I've got a long list of notes on how to do realistic mock-ups, which I'm working my way through. But yeah, it's hard to put into words. Yeah, that's why most kind of top one-to-one lessons on the piano, or any instrument really, the teacher will have their own instrument as well, so they can just demonstrate what they mean and the student will feel it, rather than putting it into mathematical terms or trying to put it into words. They can just play, and that can't be done with video tutorials really, other than saying, just do it like this and play it. It doesn't work that way.
And you have no idea who's watching. There's
exactly.
a huge diversity of people from different backgrounds who watch YouTube videos, and you're never going to know. And something might seem so entirely obvious to you as to the point of not even needing to say it. And then suddenly someone makes a comment like, oh, but what do you do this? And it gets like 100 thumbs up, and you're like, damn, okay, I need to actually think about that next time.
Absolutely, I get that, yeah. And also, I'm always conscious that there'll be guaranteed to be people watching that know a lot more on every single topic than I know. So I'm really careful in any tutorials to not say it should be done like this or you should do it like this, but rather, here's how I do it. If anything from this is useful, brilliant. If you have a better way, brilliant, share it. More comments, more traffic, whatever it is. There'll always be people that know more, which is,
of course,
fine.
That's the way. So, okay, like I say, subscribe to Simon. If you're interested in hearing these more of his mock-ups, he's got a bunch on there and tutorials on there about doing it. I want to leave on listening to one. So I want you to choose, though, if there's anything from your channel that you particularly are proud of, or even just enjoy the experience or whatever, you tell me.
So actually, weirdly, the one I'm kind of most proud of at the moment is, I say proud of, the one I've been so pleased that I managed to achieve was the latest one, which is just this kind of video. It's just an easy peasy bit of strings programming, but it's blending this sequel to V horns, the V winds, kind of solo woodwind instruments. It's blending their close microphone positions with an ensemble like Cinematic Studio Strings. And so I did a kind of, I say tutorial. I always call them beginner tutorials just in case. Beginner tutorial on how to blend closely recorded instruments with big ensemble stuff. So if you like, you can play that one, or more flashy it's with Incredibles or Star Wars or something if you want lots of
I want the one that you want. So this is V-Win's oboe demo.
Yeah, it's also the best, probably my favourite iteration of the Force theme from Star Wars anyway. In all the films, I think this is the best one.
Amazing. I just watched this the other day, so I'm ready for it again. Here we go. Beautiful.
It's a good bit of music, isn't it?
It's a good bit of music, damn.
Also, that's a kind of important video for me because it's the first time I've done custom vibrato on these instruments.
Oh, that's right.
With like I said, with the volume fader, and it's just made a world of difference. So,
sounds beautiful. I mean, to anyone, even to someone that is like myself, trained in these things and listens to it all day. If this just occurred in my life somewhere, I wouldn't bat an eye at it. You know, knowing okay, I'm watching a video. Yeah, I can maybe try to pick out something, but otherwise, it's like it's completely indiscernible, and I don't know what that means really for music going forward.
Well, I've always wondered about it as well because obviously I'm a performer first and musician before real musician before virtual musician. But you know, concert halls are still full. The companies that can afford orchestras still pay for orchestras for their films. I mean, Abbey Road and Air Studios and places like that, they're not quiet. And if anything, I think these virtual instruments will encourage people to go and listen to more live orchestral concerts, especially if they're not from that background. But yes, definitely something that's been on my mind the whole time.
Last question that's based off of that. What do you think about, say, someone is very into orchestral music of some sort, and they get very good at programming, and they begin releasing albums. These albums are just, they're mock-ups, but it's not talked about, it's not whatever, it's just presented that this is just the music. You know, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, good question. I've sometimes wondered about that, just doing kind of short pieces, releasing them as a fake orchestra and seeing if anyone spots it. But I guess it could be done. I don't think the tech's good enough just yet. Like there are limits to virtual instruments, of course. And I mean, it's cheaper to book an orchestra to play a symphony than it would be in hours for you programming it. And I can't see that changing for a long, long time. I mean, there was a 8-minute piece or something kind of on online forums, composer forums recently saying, is it a mock-up? Is it real? Is it not? And there was no confirmation in the end. But to my ears, that's months and months and months of intense programming from someone that would know each instrument absolutely inside out, or it's an 8-minute recording. So yeah, we're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
But,
interesting.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks so much, Simon. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me, and I'm a huge fan of what you do, and I'm inspired by the way that you do it. So I appreciate you sharing your tips and just being an all-around good guy and getting into the world of YouTube. So thank you for that.
That's lovely to talk to you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Bye, everybody. See you next time.